Conscious of time, we're going to keep moving. So I'm going to now leave the stage and introduce and let Birgit give you an overview of the Victorian experience. So I'm going to welcome Birgit up on stage. She's got about 10-15 minutes.
I'm a little shorter than you.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, that's fine. I'm used to that. Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come along to your Integrated Plan Network. I'm Birgit King. I'm the Corporate Planning and Performance Coordinator at Yarra Ranges Council, and that's a Victorian council. That's, I suppose if you're not familiar with the area, that's where the Dandenongs are and the Yarra Valley, so in that particular region. But I suppose my particular role, and the reason Jeff has asked me here, is because I'm the convener of the Corporate Planners Network, which is the equivalent to the IPN here. And I've been a convener there for the last 7 years, and part of my role has also been getting involved in the development of the local government performance reporting framework in Victoria. So what I want to do is share some information about that. What I've got on the slide is just to give you an understanding of our Corporate Planners Network is actually consistent of about 245 members. I don't know what you have here. But we also do a similar sort of thing where we have 3 meetings per year and a conference. So when we were talking yesterday about the idea of possibly sharing a conference one day would be fantastic. So looking forward to sort of working together and seeing whether that's something we can do. So an introduction to the local government's performance reporting framework in Victoria. What I'm going to do is just run you through some of the broad timelines. So what happened in Victoria in 2012 was that the Minister for Local Government had an understanding and wanted to find and do a bit of a deep dive into how local governments were performing. So if you look at the way that we actually report on the performance of an organisation, in Victoria we have a performance statement, and that evaluates on a couple of pages the performance of an organisation. And the investigation that they did, they found out that really a lot of councils, what they were doing was reporting on some of the outputs. Nobody was really effective in having any outcome measures and showing what impact they were having on the community. So it was always, yeah, every council is doing an enormous amount of work, but is it actually getting us to the outcome where we want to be? And that was something that most local governments didn't have. Apart from the fact that if you consider you're meant to have some sort of performance measures against your objectives of what you're aiming for, there was quite a number of councils in Victoria who had none. So transparency to the community was fine. This is our objective, this is what we're trying to aim for, but we're not evaluating ourselves very well. So, and that's when Victorian government practically turned around and said, okay, well, how about we start putting a framework together that allows a consistent approach across all councils to be able to have a set of measures that everybody reports against, and that we can actually make really transparent to the community on what we want to be achieving as an organisation. So they've changed their whole model, and in 2013 they got a group of representatives from all councils together and said, look, let's develop up some of these measures. Let's look at what are the key services that an organisation delivers. Let's look at their financial position, and then let's have a look at to ensure that some of the areas of governance is taken into consideration by all councils across the sector. Let's start a reporting framework that allows us to be able to capture all of that. So then over a probably an 18-month period, these particular measures were developed, and what we ended up doing was legislation was changed in 2014, which then made sure that it was something every council had to adhere to. Of course, that had major impacts on all organisations. A lot of councils had to have additional staff and resources to be able to cater for the additional requirements of implementing all of these. But as it turned out, within, where are we now? And 2022, and we're already down this track and going, we've had years of reporting now. We're all getting used to it. So 5 years down the track in 2019, the Minister for Local Government said, let's do a review of this. Let's see how effective developing these measures actually is. And so I'll share with you a little bit later what the outcome of that is, and it's fairly interesting. But as we progress in local government in Victoria, we continue, of course, to say, are these the right measures? And part of the discussion with Jeff has been around the fact that, you know, it's beneficial to have some form of measures, but are they the right ones? And are they actually effectively driving the change that we want within an organisation and the sector? So we continue to work and review some of these measures and try and improve them. So from a Victorian perspective, this is the governance structure that they have in place, so that we actually have the Minister for Local Government who approves all of the information that goes public. We have a steering committee that reviews on a regular basis. They have meetings every 6 months to review some of the progress that is occurring and revising some of the measures, looking at you know, what legislative changes may need to take place to improve it and how effective are they. And we also have a technical working group that meets on a regular basis to review the actual measures. Because, you know, from a steering committee perspective, the members of the steering committee tend to be directors, CEOs, members of LG Pro, but at the end of the day, it is the individual staff at councils. They're the ones that are dealing with the day-to-day data collection, how the information is actually used, how is it actually promoted, what is the perception of the community of these particular measures. So all of that is really up to the individual staff. They know the details. So what we call them LGV, you call them OLG, they come together and actually say, let's get the actual staff together and talk about how can we make these improvements to these particular measures. So, and of course, our councillors have are key stakeholders in this whole process, because councils themselves and the councillors, it is all about these particular measures being something that is being transparent to the community. And that's where, when we were talking about what are some of the barriers, one of the key barriers is that reputational risk. How are councils going to be perceived when all of a sudden all of these measures are up in lights on a website for everyone to compare? So that's our governance structure. So to give you an understanding of the type of measures that we actually came across, was that when we actually looked at what were the key areas that we want to be able to monitor. When we're talking about monitoring, we have 79 councils in Victoria. So we have a number of course, rural, regional councils. We've got interface councils, so they're the semi-urban and rural combination, and we have the metro councils. And then you look at, well, what could be the measures that we could have that everybody can be measured on? And is it a bit of a challenge to find the right suite? Yes, it is. So we ended up saying, okay, well, what are the key services that we need to be looking at? And we had a list initially of about probably 180, and then we sort of went down and said, okay, well, what are going to be the key ones? So we ended up having, what we have now is 10 key services, and I'm not going to go into the detail of them, but it's, you know, key services like MCH services, governance, waste. Yes, waste was one of the ones. How do you measure waste across every sector? Yes, bit of a challenge. Can be done, but how effective is it? We have a set of financial measures, as well as saying that we have some sustainable capacity measures. So to looking long term and saying how do we ensure that what we provide for our community is sustainable in the long term. What we also have, with the introduction of a change in legislation, they've introduced a governance and management checklist. So to ensure that across the sector, every council has consistent approach to making sure that they have an operational plan, that they have a delivery plan, that they have a community strategic plan. So making sure that all of these particular documents are actually in place, also ensuring that you've got business continuity plans in place, ensuring that your reporting is actually done on a regular basis. So everybody needs to report publicly to say that that's what they're actually doing. And it may be something where you're going, oh, well, that's standard. Everybody should be doing that. But when all of a sudden it becomes a compliance issue that you have to actually be doing this, you find out there's so many people or so many councils that aren't actually doing all of those elements. And they're the critical ones from a perspective of governance that should be undertaken to ensure everyone has that consistent approach. So that was something that was developed. So what we ended up having, reporting, we now have 58 performance measures, and those particular ones we have to report on every 6 months to our executive team, but we need to also report on them publicly once a year onto an external website, as well as including that information into our annual report, and that is sent off to the Minister. And part of those things, part of those particular measures are actually audited. So part of our auditing process is our financials as well as our performance statement, which contains these outcome measures. So again, there's a lot more rigour around it, and every single council now has to participate in a community satisfaction survey to ensure that they actually get a set of measures that allows us to be able to see how are we performing in relation to overall community engagement, how are we performing in relation to overall performance, and also around consultation and advocacy. These are the things that across the sector every council has to report on. So it just gives that consistent ability for the Minister to have an overview of how councils are performing, but also through this Know Your Council website, it's the ability for a community member to be able to have a look at council and have a look and say, well, are we actually performing well in relation to waste management? And that particular website allows you to be able to benchmark against any other council in Victoria. So again, it's really challenging to say, are we actually comparing apples with apples? Because, as you know, waste services is a very consistent service, but is delivered at different levels within different councils. So there's definitely challenges associated with that, and how is a community member going to perceive that information that's on that website? And how do they interpret that? So there's again a challenge there. So, and one of the other things that was actually introduced was to ensure that every single council has a list of their services. So, and also identifying what is the cost associated with the service delivery, and to make it really transparent to the community, to say this is what our budget is, this is what we've spent, and this is what our variance is. And that actually outlining and saying, this is our service, this is the actual audience for that particular service or who we're providing that service to, and then this is our spend. I suppose that is something that we have to make publicly available, but on another level, that is something that is used by our Essential Services Commission, which here in New South Wales is the IPR, yes. So again, you can sort of see how all this information, all this data is actually used by various audiences and for different purposes. But it is consistent, and it is something that every council has to do, whether or not they see value in it or not. So what I'll just show you is that this is the Know Your Council website, which means, I'm not going to go into the detail, but it's just where you can actually easily, as any community member, go in, select a council and run comparative reports. And you also have information about the actual council itself. You have information available around their customer satisfaction survey. So it gives you a little bit of information about that particular council, and the future of this particular website is currently being reviewed, but they want to be able to include more and more information so that it does become a communication tool. That's the idea of this particular website. As you can sort of see on this particular slide, you've got an example of 2 councils, and you can see the 4-year data set. So you can see the trend. One of the challenges with this particular website, if you're comparing your local roads maintained, one of the things is that you don't have the commentary. So if a particular measure is trending up or down, it is very challenging for a community member to, at this point in time, actually see the commentary. So you have the option of putting commentary in, but it's not visible. So again, you can click on it and you dive into the actual website and you'll get to the commentary. But as anyone knows, how many clicks do you go to find information? If you don't know it's there, and if it's not staring in the face, you go, oh, that council's not performing well. And that's what happens, and they're going, oh, okay, yeah, I don't like what they're doing. Or you might look at the trend of this particular one and go, hang on, you know, seal local road maintenance condition standards, nah, they're not trending in the right direction. But a community member doesn't necessarily go and dive a little bit deeper to be able to put that full information in. The other challenge we have is that the information that we actually put in there also gets audited. So you can't make assumptions either. It has to be based on fact. So there's all these challenges around it, but it is about how do we work with state government on this to make a platform that allows us to be able to communicate some of this information effectively, and be able to then, you know, tell a story to the community, be transparent about our performance. That's the idea of it. That's the value of it. So this is just a snapshot of our customer satisfaction survey. So considering that it's legislated that every council undertakes a community satisfaction survey, we have a few companies in Victoria who will actually undertake and use the same methodology to capture the data around customer satisfaction. So we have, at the moment, 7 questions that are compulsory. Every council has to participate and get the results for those 7 questions, and they are then made publicly available. So, and again, state government is supporting us in the costing of it, so it's not excessively expensive. But also you have to look at the fact that you don't have a choice around the actual question. It is asked for you. So when somebody asks a question around, you know, how satisfied are you with community engagement, you sort of look at that and going, okay, what engagement are you actually talking about? I'd love to dive a little bit deeper and get some detail around, you know, if the satisfaction is lower than last year, where's the change? But because it's a preset survey, it does get a little bit more challenging. So that gives you a bit of an understanding of the questions that are actually asked and the trend data. So this particular survey has been going since 2012, with the current methodology in place. Prior to that, it commenced in 2003. But it gives you nice trend data to be able to see what is happening in the state and what are some of the trends that are occurring. And as you do deep dives into the data, you can do your analysis to sort of find out what is happening in the various areas. And yeah, waste management is one of those ones that are fairly high. And since COVID, we've actually introduced a question around COVID response as well. So it does give a good understanding. And this particular survey is undertaken with a sample size of 400. It's a telephone survey. And it's done every year at exactly the same time in February. So it allows us to pretty much have the information that we need for the end of year reporting. So it's a really good mechanism to be able to get consistent results across the sector and see where you're trending. It is a perception survey, but you are able to analyse the data and sort of understand whether or not a community member has had interaction with council or not. But it is generally a perception survey. So our Victorian our local government's performance reporting framework is also made available in different formats, so you can actually drill down into the various areas and see geographically where certain trends are occurring. So Vargo has that particular website up and running, so you can actually go in and, again, it's publicly available, so people, if they really want to drill down into it, they have access to that. And one of the other things is that state government actually make available every single detail of every measure. So if you want to go and download the 79,000 records of the data set, you can. You can do your own analysis and do your own comparison. The website does some for you, limited format, but, you know, if you're a little bit tech-savvy, you can actually go in and do some really good analysis on exactly where some of the trends are and compare it to different councils. So there's that opportunity as well. One of the things that I suppose I just wanted to quickly touch is that Victoria also introduced an integrated planning and reporting framework, but that was 18 months ago. The measures were introduced in 2014. So retrospectively, so we now have an integrated planning framework. So I sort of find that the work that's been done by Victoria is a little bit, you know, the wrong way around. It would have actually been a lot better for us to have an integrated planning framework and then, based on that, develop the actual measures. But again, things work in different ways, don't they? But if you look at our framework, it is fairly similar to what the New South Wales model is. I think there's only been a couple of things that I've sort of come across that are slightly different. Like we have a community engagement policy, which talks about, the fact that every council sets their own level of engagement with their community. Here you have a 28-day engagement process that you have to undertake. Victoria's removed that totally. Every council dictates what their own level of engagement is and the way that they will do it and at what level they will do. So that's part of this integrated planning framework now, where councils have developed their own engagement policy and then have guidelines associated with it and a framework to how they will engage at what level, using what area of deliberative engagement and what principles they'll apply. So that's something that every council can determine themselves through their own policy. And it just does make it easier because every community is different. So it makes it legislated to say that we have to have a policy, but also gives us the freedom to be able to engage our community the way that we want to. As I said, in 2019, so 5 years after having this framework in place, our minister said, let's do a review of this. Let's see how effective has it been to have 5 years of measures. What ended up happening, and when I spoke to them, they actually said, oh yeah, look, everyone's done it. Everyone's had to do it. It's been compliance. But if we look at it really honestly, a lot of councils have seen it as a compliance framework. They haven't actually seen the real benefit in it. They're still at an early phase, so 5 years is early in the process of developing an effective framework. So they're saying, give it a little bit more time. But some of the feedback has also been that the state government, or LGV, have actually, they've supported councils, but possibly not in all of the areas where they really needed the support. So part of the areas where they're saying, oh, well, we've given you templates, we've given you guidelines, we've run information sessions, but they haven't actually looked at what was the actual value of these measures, of this data, and how can it be used? How can we actually upskill staff to effectively use it? And how can that data actually translate into action for community outcomes? That was an area where they were sort of saying, well, nobody's actually given councils that training and that support to be able to do that. And because it's been an add-on, you have to consider that all of a sudden every council had to either find resource or somebody had to have the role of actually putting all of these measures together. And my staff put these measures together every year, and it's really time consuming. And within, first or second year of this framework being released, you should see the amount of job advertisements. Performance reporting officer, it was everywhere, because it was sort of like everyone stumbled through the first year, and then afterwards it was like, oh, we need an additional person to do this. We just can't do it on our own. It was just too intensive, too much work. And I think that's one of those things to consider. And then, having the Victorian Auditor General's Office coming back and saying, we're still in infancy after 5 years. It hasn't really been that effective. And we're still struggling with the measures. We still haven't quite got them right. And people still don't see the value in some of our waste measures, for example, or they don't see the value in, some of our outcome measures, which everybody's struggling to try and get information from. So, was it a successful process? It's work in progress, that's all I can say. I don't know how I'm going for time. Am I right? Okay. So, what I want to do now is just talk about some of the barriers that Victorian councils have sort of experienced. As I said, one of the key things is that it was something that was introduced to us. Okay, there was a technical working group, we all were part of that, but at the end of the day, it was only a representation of councils, and we worked on it for close to 18 months to get these measures right. And then it was just imposed on councils. How many people have their own service and go, I know how to evaluate my service. Don't let somebody else tell me how to evaluate my service. So it was very much a compliance driven. And various service areas, from my own personal experience and what I heard, is people were saying, well, they're not my measures, I'll continue to measure my own. So we had duplication. And then what we also had was the fact that we actually had other state government agencies who had fairly similar measures, but the methodology was slightly different. And then it was sort of like, okay, well, Sustainability Victoria want that waste measure, but the LGPRF want that waste measure, but the two aren't actually the same. And guess what? Both are public. There comes the confusion. So you've got all of these little challenges that are propping up over the years that you sort of, if you had the chance to sort of say, let these state government agencies talk to each other and let's have one consistent approach. And that would make a lot more sense. We also had the challenge of reporting timelines. I mean, I don't know how it works here in New South Wales, but we have our planning stats need to be submitted. By the time they come out in the public report, that is past the time that we are actually audited on them. So, and if there's any inconsistencies, then all of a sudden this public website is different to what we have on our website, and the timing's incorrect. Some of our measures are calendar year, some of our measures are financial year. So that gets people confused. Then we also have the fact of that we actually report these measures to state government, but then we also have to report these measures to, again, other state agencies, like the Department of Health, for example, on our maternal and child health services. So all of a sudden, it is not just one source of information going out, it's various. So to us, it's like, it's duplication again. And who likes duplication? Nobody. So that's where the challenge is. One of the other things that it was a real issue for, I suppose, seeing the value in this is that it is 10 services. So you have your financials, your financial measures, and that's fine. They've always been pretty much in your financial reports and you report on them anyway. So there's a duplication there. But from a service delivery, they have selected 10 services. I mean, how many councils here deliver 10 services only? Everybody has 40, 50 services that they deliver on. So why are we measured on 10 only? And why is customer experience not part of that? Economic development, I mean, we heard yesterday why economic development isn't part of it, because a lot of councils don't actually have a huge budget allocated to it. But initially, some of our measures actually included economic development. And it was like, there is a lot more services that we could be comparing, but they've only picked 10. So we have to spend all of this effort on 10 services only. What happens to the rest? What message are we sending to the community when it's only 10? So there's a bit of a challenge. One of the other things is the capability of the staff and leaders within an organisation to actually use the data. I mean, we all can capture a lot of data, but is it actually driving change within our organisation? If it's not driving change and is not a focus for our organisation, why are we doing it? I mean, collecting data for the sake of collecting data? Some of these measures, yeah, we are collecting data for the sake of collecting this data. It is actually not a focus for the organisation. I can honestly say at the moment in our organisation, libraries is not our focus. We've had so many natural disasters happening in the last 12 months. Libraries is not our focus. Yet, one of the things that state government is going to introduce for us is target setting. So that means we have to actually publicly say, this is the target we're aiming at. This is how we're going to improve this service. But it's not our focus. So there's a clash. So the concept of saying, let's have measures that everybody is transparent about and everybody's striving for continuous improvement, but unless that continuous improvement is a focus for your organisation at that time, you really don't want to devote the time or effort to it. So how do you manage that clash? And as I said, it is about providing leaders in the organisation the skills and capability of these measures, actually giving them the story of what it is that is happening within the organisation. How do they interpret the data? What do they do with that data? How regularly is that actually evaluated, and does it drive the change that they want? Do they know how to read the data? Because otherwise it's not valued. It's not valued by anyone. So I have to say that over the last 9 years, Victorian state government has tried to provide us with some form of technology that allows us to be able to capture all of these measures. To the day, 9 years later, I still think it's extremely clunky. We're still using an Excel spreadsheet. Other software companies have developed processes being able to capture that, but again, it comes at a cost. And not every council has the resources to be able to spend that particular money on one requirement like this. Auditing process, for example, that costs every organisation as well. It was an add-on burden that every organisation had to pay for. Wasn't something that we chose, but okay, it's just an add-on cost that comes along. Benchmarking. Jeff spoke about benchmarking, the value of benchmarking. Yes, this particular open platform allows you to benchmark against all other councils, but you're really not comparing apples with apples. Every council, and one of the other things is the measure definition and methodology. Every other council has their own way of capturing data. Our workbook that outlines how we capture and what information is required for our 10 services is 170 pages. That is the document of the standard approach of how to capture these 10 services. So can you imagine council that has 40 or 50 services? You know, there's no way that you'd have a way of being able to do that. So every year, when state government releases a change to the methodology, we're all going, okay, this change has been implemented here, so here's a new manual of 100 pages, then we add our own methodology to make sure that we have the ability to be able to capture that information. So there's that challenge as well, documenting it all. So you can see why we have additional resources. So there's some of the things that we struggle with every single year, and it doesn't get any easier. So, and it's not only the fact that the methodology is there, but as you know, staff change it. So one person knows exactly where to get that information, what cost centre to use, which software, what's been run here, what report has gone out. But then that changes, and then you have to re-educate the next person on the whole process again. So it takes time. Okay, so the future of the LGPRF. So really what they're hoping to do is they're going out at the moment to create a new platform that allows the community to be able to actually see not only the trend data for the last 5 years, but to actually have the commentary visible, so that councils can actually say, this is what's happening, this is the service we deliver compared to my neighbouring council or compared to the rural council. So when our cost is extremely high for waste removal, for example, in our municipality is extremely high, but that's because we actually don't have a transfer station. So, you know, all of our trucks have to travel anything up to, 200, 300 kilometres to pick up a bin, whereas a neighbouring council, 15 kilometres. Slight cost variation. But people compare saying, oh, hang on, why is your cost so high? So these are the challenges. So the new website is going to allow us to be able to do that. But what they're also aiming for is that for the actual agencies across Victoria to be able to incorporate data into the one platform. And I know that that's a major challenge because data sharing and the risk associated with that and data security is something that people are still challenged with. So that's something that, they're trying to work through. But, that's the whole idea, to have one centralised platform and people talking to each other and agencies talking to each other and populating this platform in an easy format. So that's what's about to happen, and hopefully in the next 2 years it will. So, and the other thing is, as I said, the target setting. That is currently going through legislation, so hopefully that will, the bill will be passed soon, and that would mean that we have, for all of our measures, we will have targets to be set to ensure that as a sector we are constantly looking at continuous improvement and making it public to where we want to be. Of course, measures are going to be reviewed on a regular basis, so we will continue to do that. The methodology of these measures is not perfect. There's always things that need to be revised, there's always areas that need to be improved, and I think it's really relevant and important for the technical working group to be able to feed back and have that ongoing communication with state government to say, this is relevant, let's change a measure. If the measure is not being effectively used by anybody, why have you got it in there? Those are the questions that we always ask and say, it's got to be relevant to us. If it's not relevant and it's not driving the change that we want, we don't want to be doing this. So we need to stand up for that and say, we need to change. They are talking about actually, utilising better software to be able to upload. So the ability for any council to be able to have a consistent software to be able to just upload the information or transfer the data instead of an Excel spreadsheet. And they're also talking about, providing some support around the utilisation. So again, state government has been knows about the shortage of the lack of skills within areas. So they're talking about actually improving that and supporting councils a little bit more in that area. That's all for me.
All right, thank you, Birgit. Does anyone have any quick questions for Birgit at this stage? Was there anything that didn't quite understand, or Christina?
We had a lengthy discussion about that because they wanted us to have a generic increase, and we actually said no. There's no way that we could do that. So every council sets their own target, but their target becomes publicly visible. And the process of what they're going to do is practically everybody, as part of their budgeting process each year, will determine what next year's target should be. What they'll then do is make it publicly, or make it available to all other councils to see what other councils are putting in as their target for next year before it goes public. And then that gives councils then an ability to say, hang on, based on my neighbouring councils, they're going to have an improve of 10%. Oh, how do I feel about that? How's that going to impact me? How's it going to impact our reputation as a council? So you get an opportunity to change it again. So, and then it becomes publicly available. Yeah, and look, there's many opportunities that you can use this platform for, and advocacy is certainly one of those. We're sort of using it, but on the flip side as well, you have to look at the fact that in Victoria, one of the other things is that it allows a consistent ability for the minister to have an understanding of where all councils are at. And, if there's certain councils that are actually struggling in certain areas, the minister can actually go in and say, look, if you look at your results and if you look at your neighbouring councils, we can go and support you and say, okay, if you're struggling, maybe we'll look at some shared services in this particular area. If it's something that we can help with, let's do that. And I suppose the platform also allows you, with your benchmarking, to be able to look at other councils. Okay, you might not be comparing apples with apples, but you can actually say, well, they've achieved a really good result. Why have they achieved that? You can actually have the conversations with them and say, what are you doing? Are you doing anything that I could possibly leverage off and improve my service? So, but yeah, comparing each result, so true benchmarking, I don't think that's possible. There's barely a council that we at Yarra Ranges, for example, could compare ourselves to. We have one that's fairly close, but otherwise it doesn't exist. But I can certainly look at any of the other councils and say, if they're getting a really good result in one area, I want to understand why. And yeah, so there is those benefits. And if it's not working too well, you can then advocate and be transparent about it. But can I also say that the website itself, the amount of hits that website gets is probably a lot less than what I would hope for. And that to me is a little bit challenging because we put a lot of effort into that And we always keep talking to state government and saying, can you promote this more? Yarra Rangers, we've used the website itself to practically say our commentary about our performance measures, we put a link back to our own personal website so that we give more information about the service delivery. But really, I can say that over the time that this website has been up and running, I think, one of the trees falling down on one of the main roads in the Dandenongs would get more Facebook hits than the website. So, I think there's opportunities there for state government to really promote it more. And I don't think they've done that as well as they could have and utilise that, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Birgit. Thank you for that insight from the Victorian perspective. So put your hands together for Birgit. Thank you very much. Has anyone else tried to do the why are my rates higher than my neighbours deep dive? Did anyone work it out? So my theory is, because the state government in 1974 decided to do rates peg, they just went, right, we're rate pegging from today. So depending on where your rates were in your council at that date is where it was. So if you'd increased them or you hadn't increased them for a year or two, that's where they were. They didn't try to equalise them. They didn't go back and say, why is Drummoyne higher than Lane Cove or Orange higher than Dubbo? It was just a snapshot at that time, and it's just grown or not grown depending on the councils adding or taking up rate pegs or not. So it's not a great system to start with, but it's the one we have to live with. So it's a tricky one. Anthony.
Just the other thing that happens is we all do SRVs at different times.
Correct.
Like we're doing that at the moment.
Yep.
People saying, why do you need the SRV? And we're saying, well, everyone else did it 3 years ago. We're just doing what they've already done. Yep.
All right. Guess what time it is? Morning tea time. So we get a hit of caffeine. We have 20 minutes. Let's be back here at 20 minutes. Tom.
Hey, child knows you don't have to go to the school just to make it with a beat the bambino. It's like a beat. Kid, you good looking, but you don't know what you're cooking, do you? Do you? Do you? Do you? Do you? All you color blazing. Do you? Mambo like a crazy. Try an enchilada. Fish bacalao. Hello, quesadilla. Happy in the pizza. All you color blazing. Mambo like a crazy. Hey, mambo. Go, go, go. Hey, mambo. Go, go, go. All you Calabrese do the mambo like a crazy with it. Try an enchilada with fishy bacalao and then hey, hello kissy ditchy. You get happy in the pizza when you. All you Calabrese do the mambo like a crazy with it. Hey mambo, mambo Italiano. Hey, hey mambo, mambo Italiano. Go, go, go. You mixed up a Siciliano. All you Calabrese do the mambo like a crazy with it. Hey mambo, mambo Italiano. Hey, hey mambo, mambo Italiano. Ho, ho, ho. You mixed up a Siciliano. Hello, quesadilla. You get happy in the pizza when you.